Thank you very much, Chairman John, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Right, to get us in the mood, could I just have a show of hands, please, for those of you who, say, during the last month have got up in the morning, gone into work and thought, right, today I'm going to be an unsafe surgeon. Could I just have a quick look? All right, how many of you during the last month have gone into work for an operating list and done a major surgical procedure? Come on, well, I mean, you know, surgery is risky. It's therefore not safe. You are being unsafe, therefore I'm going to report you all to the GMC when I get back, okay? The point is that surgery is never going to be entirely risk-free. All that we can do is to make it as safe as possible. Bland Sutton, as our president has said, was a very distinguished surgeon. He became president of the Royal College of Surgeons, as well as president of this association. He had a large practice, became very wealthy, and I guess that is an indication that he was a pretty safe surgeon. I wonder how he would look at today's practice of surgery. He would undoubtedly have practiced in this sort of environment, although a little bit more modern than his time, but big Nightingale wards, ward rounds with acolytes and honoraries and nurses there in attendance, and very much the heroic surgeon who was there battling against disease on behalf of the patient and looked up to by his peers in that light, and perceived by himself probably in that light as well. It's somewhat irritating, I think you'll agree, to be beaten over the head suddenly or specifically about being safe surgeons. It's as if we haven't been safe before, that we've actually been practicing unsafe surgery, when we actually don't intend to do that. Patient safety is part and parcel of delivering high-quality surgery. In Darzy's words, it's effective care, safe care, and good patient experience. But I mean, we all know what we mean by high-quality practice, and we know what it is when we see it, and we know bad practice and unsafe practice when we do see it as well. It's not a new tension. It's not a new perception. Florence Nightingale was well aware that surgeons sometimes were a bit cavalier and took unnecessary risks on behalf of their unsuspecting patients. The delivery of high-quality care depends upon team efforts. We hear that time and time again. But it does depend on competent teams, competent leadership, and competent staff. Now, I'd like to give you a slightly different take on quality care, and if you like, patient safety, because it actually starts with the selection and training of surgeons. This is my personal journey, if you like. I started off, as all of you have, as a surgical practitioner, consultant, a trainer when I was a junior and when I took up the job. But I very quickly came to realize that if you wanted to make a real difference, if you could improve the administration, regulation, and delivery of training, you could actually achieve huge amounts. And so, without really terrific planned progression, I got more and more involved in this sort of way with the training and its administration and regulation. By the 90s, service issues were clearly becoming more and more impacting on the delivery of training. People were getting distracted with service, and training was patchy. Trainees were passing through the system on the nod. If they served their time, it was very difficult to actually stop a trainee once into the system. There was a perception that there was more and more litigation around, more and more horror stories, and we all know the individuals, some of the individuals who were sinning. And these miscreants and the misdemeanors were amplified by a press which was looking for stories. We tried to make the system work, and if you look here, these are the sorts of tools that were available. Trainers, trainees needed to know what to do, specification for posts needed to be delineated, and examinations and assessments were all dependent on the syllabus. And actually, the syllabus was not really fit for purpose, and it didn't take an awful lot of perception and digging down to see that the problem was there were no objective standards within the syllabus against which progress, training, trainers, assessments, etc. could be measured. The whole, of course, equals the curriculum, and the syllabus is, if you like, the key ingredient of that curriculum. And so the intercollegiate surgical curriculum was born, and the colleges, to their everlasting credit, got a lot of money from the Department of Health and were there before the MMC, and they were planning already to sharpen up the curriculum and its syllabus. They had made the decision that it would be a competence-based curriculum, that it would be an outcomes-based curriculum. It would no longer be time-based. It would be a syllabus which, a list, yes, a list of what is to be achieved and when it's to be achieved and to what standard, but a sophisticated list, and it would act as a reference point and a clear, objective reference point for the standards of practice, and that is the standards of practice from training and, by inference, practice out there. The important difference was that it expressed these standards in terms of performance, and it was intended and framed in such a way that it would be future-proof against changes within the health service. It was setting a direction of travel. These were the words that you will find in the new syllabuses. The trainee will be able to do, will be able to know in detail, will be able to perform, will be able to demonstrate, etc., all doing words. The profession, of course, shaped those standards, iterated them, set them down, and that was the specialty's job, and the colleges actually used that to frame and set and develop the syllabus, and everything else flowed from that. The curriculum is then delivered, this is the idea, to the health service, the powers that be, and the NHS is then tasked with delivering that curriculum. Now that's the stage we are at the moment. It may seem that things are not always as good as they should be, but as a profession, and as colleges and associations, we have done our bit. We have actually set down the syllabus and said, this is what you have to do to train competent surgeons for the future. A couple of words about assessment of competence, because it's a word which is bandied around freely, but I think not always accurately. And it's a little bit of a peccadillo for me, I have to say. Now, these guys are competent train drivers. They are competent steam engine train drivers. And those aficionados among you will know that this is Bittern, and it's an A for Gresley Pacific. But these guys are steam engine drivers. They can't drive diesel rail cars or linked diesel high-speed trains. If you look in other professions, and flying is the obvious one, I make no apology for using flying quite a bit in this presentation. And if you look at this chap here, who's a younger version of me, doing stupid things, and I guess at that time I was a competent amateur at flying as a private pilot, doing some aerobatics. I was licensed to do that, and amongst my peers, I was competent. But compared to the Red Arrows, I was a tyro. These guys were experts, but amongst the Blue Angels, the Thunderbirds, and all the other aerobatic teams, they were merely competent with their peers. But to me, they were experts. So the term competent, I put to you, is an adjective, and without a qualifier, it is a vague, meaningless term. A competent surgeon. You guys are all competent surgeons. I know you are. But what sort of surgeon? An SHO? An SPR? ST3? I don't know. Just a competent surgeon doesn't mean anything. But that term does start to mean something specific, because if you go back to the syllabus, those standards are enshrined in the syllabus in terms of what you will do when you've completed training. You will be able to do this, this, and this. You will know this, this, and this. And so the role defines the competence. And it irritates me, only slightly, to hear people say, oh, it's competent-based, therefore it's average, because it isn't. You set the competence level at expert, and you are an expert, and that is what the CCT is set at. As a consultant or CCT holder, you are an expert. But there is another way in which we use the word competence. My late and dear wife, coming out of the theatre a couple or 3 years ago, I said, what did you think of that performance? And she said it was a competent performance. And there, she meant that it was competent in the scale of good, bad, indifferent. It was all right, but it wasn't fantastic. Right on. It was competent. And it's used there differently, and that's the other way in which we use competent. It doesn't tell you anything about the competence of the actors. They might have been performing out of their socks on that day and actually not be very good at all. As it was the RSC, one could infer that they were pretty competent Shakespearean actors. In fact, they were probably expert. But one performance does not tell you about the overall competence of an individual. So thus we have competent practitioners, competent performances, and a great opportunity for performance. It then leads on to how we assess competence, and this is one of the other great achievements, I think, of the new curricula. Knowledge can be assessed easily in examinations, either right or wrong, and you can set them with varying degrees of sophistication, as EMQs, MCQs, and all the rest of it, but you can never actually produce something which is entirely valid as to the application of that knowledge. So it is for skills, clinical skills. You can judge them to an extent when you're watching a trainee in an examination or a candidate, but you don't know really whether that's a one-off or several. Technical skills at this stage can only really be assessed in the workplace. Simulation coming along and will be the way of the future. But at the moment, we are where we are. And the professional skills, those skills which it is so difficult to assess and teach, actually you can only do in the workplace. And establishing robust workplace assessments which can be objectively assessed and which can be iterated through the assigned educational supervisor is another major achievement. In the flying world, this is your horny-handed old instructor. He's your friend. You look up to him. He's pleasant. He's expert. He's trained to be an instructor, and he's watching you all the time as well as teaching you. He's seen it all before, just like you guys as trainers. Every performance you do will be logged. You will keep the log. He or she will validate it. No room for escape. That's what you've done. And that is the measure of your experience. And that logged experience tells us that the trainee is making progress. It tells us that they're being trained properly. And it tells you that there is sufficient volume of experience there to underpin satisfactory competence. And if you put those two elements together, you then have a pretty robust prediction of competence. And it gives you all sorts of other opportunities. Once you start collecting logged experience and numbers, you can then start, as they do in flying, to make a guess, not just a guess, an objective understanding of the norms for progress, and you can then detect outliers, those folk who are not making progress, whether by aptitude, or poor training, and make decisions about how they progress. And in the flying world, if you take 100 goes and you still can't land the 747 correctly, the instructor will turn to you and say, look, I can get you to fly this aeroplane, but it's going to take a long time and you are not going to find yourself in employment, and you're going to struggle with revalidation. And those are the conversations that we are increasingly going to have as trainers, or have to have as trainers with our trainees. It gives you an idea of progress and the sorts of rate of progress you can expect, mapped to experience. So minimum numbers and standards are important, and JAG, in our world, actually are ahead of the game. They set minimum numbers to become trained, they set minimum numbers that you must perform to stay experienced, and if you fall short of them, you have to make them up. The American College of Surgeons has seen no reason to stop using minimum experience and minimum numbers. In the intercollegiate project, our first iteration of the syllabus and the curriculum put to the PMET-B included numbers for all the specialties. They'd worked it all out, and the index operations had minimum numbers. It was rejected out of hand by PMET-B. And that was a terrific missed opportunity, and it showed breathtaking lack of competence on behalf of the people in PMET-B, because it said, use time instead. Well, we knew that time did not work. Time was not a measure of experience. And so the Intercollegiate Surgical Project was launched in 2007, warts and all, but it sets a very important direction of travel. Was it as good as it could have been? Well, honestly, it could have been better. We used this model, which is the CanMEDS model, developed by the Canadian Medical Association in 1990, which actually is a neat way of dividing up the various domains of what makes up a doctor, and a surgeon in particular. And if you look at it, many of those attributes were actually pretty skimpy in the syllabus. We'd concentrated on knowledge and clinical skills, and the professional skills, we really didn't have a very clear idea of actually how to teach and assess those in a more systematic way. It's better now, and there's better understanding, and it will be in Bill Allen and his colleagues' next iteration of the syllabus, and it will be sharpened up. But these are the sorts of things that come under that heading, and you're all aware of it. These guys are trained in professional standards, professional skills and behaviors from the word go. Even I, as an amateur pilot, get a bit of that sort of thing, called airmanship. But look at those guys. They ooze professionalism. They're smart. Take note, they are smart. They wear a uniform. You don't mind putting your life in the hands of those people. They look the part, and they walk the walk. Professionalism in aviation is an exact mirror of what we would expect, or should expect, of ourselves in the surgical environment and surgical practice. The only difference is that we could substitute the patient instead of the passenger. It's to do with patient safety, but it's to do with quality of care, and it is recognized and a fundamental part of pilot training. Not that pilots work in a particularly different situation to us. Look at our diversity of practice and standards and competence levels, and look at the aviation scene, just as diverse. Many, many different facets, all requiring regulation, definition, and working together harmoniously like a watch. You may want to be a Top Gun. More likely, you will end up as your first license in this sort of situation. But you will both be certified and competent. You will take instructor's courses if you want to be a trainer, and those instructor's courses will be well-defined, will be tested, will have been tested, and you will have to keep current on your instructing abilities and your experience. It works. And then at the end, you end up with these superb professionals who can do what Captain Schellenberger did, and you don't need me to go over that again, in dealing with an unexpected and unplanned, completely almost one-off situation, and brought off a terrific piece of airmanship with no injuries to the passengers. And that is how we should be working as people, as surgeons, and also as a system. The judgment call for aviation is the same as for surgeons, but I would say the difference is that the level of uncertainty and predictability in the surgical and clinical scene, of course, is much, much less. And that's where there is a difference. But if you look at the influence that aviation thinking has had on surgery, it is substantial. And you could add to that list the oncoming revalidation, which again is equivalent to the relicensing, and it is coming, and it is going to get tougher. But you look at those areas, we've all learned these from aviation. Now, what about human factors? A lot talked about human factors at the moment. Could I just ask, see if you're all still awake, how many of you have actually been on a human factors course? How many have not? So the majority have not. Interesting. Because it is the train coming down the track. I mean, human factors, leadership, knots, lips, those are the courses. And they all approximately aim to teach the same sort of stuff. And it's a way of teaching a degree of team working and a professional approach to our craft. It's quite a difficult thing to explain. Tony Giddens, Oscar Traynor, and Simon Patterson Brown and folk like that have been talking about these for years and have educated us. I like to think, and I put it to you, that this is a very good way of considering human factors, which is actually the way that we work and react with our environment. We're a computer at our heart. It's a supercomputer. We know about computers. We've all got them, whether they're an Apple or a PC. We all know that they require inputs. There's the input highlighted, and their eyes, ears, sensations, and smell. We know what happens to that computer if we start to put in large files to process, internet downloading, printing, scanning, and Skype at the same time. The thing grinds to a halt. Every little bit that we put in occupies processing power. And yet, why, looking at the ears, do we persist in playing music in theatres? Why do we not have the quiet that no doubt Sir John Bland Sutton expected in his theatres? Why do we allow the clanging, the nurses talking, and the rest of it? Oh, we want to be nice, we want to stop them getting bored. No, that actually is a distraction. And I put it to you that we should be thinking very carefully about how we control the environment within the theatres, for an example. And the same goes true on the wards. And the same goes true in the outpatients, the ringing telephone, the disturbance, the interference between us and the patients. It impacts on quality care. Where we differ, perhaps, from your ordinary processor is that the emotions can overlay and degrade function. If you're not feeling well, if you're tired, you're upset, whatever, that will degrade performance. And the classic learning opportunity for aviation was the Staines crash of the Trident with Captain Keyes as the commander. Now, this resulted in total loss of life, and what happened was that he had just gone on board with his co-pilot. They had had a flaming row. He was an old-style, autocratic captain, trained in the war and flown the war, absolute chain of command, I am the boss. And the youngsters actually had a different view of the world. They'd had a union meeting. These two were not speaking to each other. They took off, and poorly designed cockpit, somebody, we don't know who, pulled the wrong lever, the flaps retracted, and the plane fell out of the sky, everybody dead and gone. That made the aviation industry, certainly in this country, think about how teams work together, and cockpit resource management, CRM, came into being. And it has developed into the full-blown human factors now. So emotions play a part. Should we really be operating and doing risky things if we're sad, upset, had a bereavement? Surely we should be taking ourselves off until we're fixed. What about the maintenance? Skipping on maintenance. Again, a bad news. You run your computer till it's hot. You run it until the processor is overheating, and it doesn't work. Let's just for a moment look at fatigue. These are some of the differing views that have been expressed in the aviation industry about fatigue. Pilots know it is the most dangerous thing. But schedulers, they don't want sleep. They will push it to the limit. Ryanair will push it to the limit. So it has obvious impacts. You know about these things, but actually, and they are fact, and they degrade the performance of the processor and our performance. There's a huge body of scientific evidence about sleep. Karolinska, Surrey's got a sleep unit, and they understand the mechanisms. We have these two little pinpoints, blocks, 20,000 cells in the hypothalamus, which probably date back to our reptilian ancestors, and they're our body clocks, and they will not be silenced. And we have to take account of that. The sleep cycle. Sleep is desperately important. Do we get enough of that sleep? Do we get the right type of sleep? These are the stages, and this is the sleep cycle. I'm sure we all knew this at one time. I certainly needed reminding. But it's a 90-minute cycle, and you must get to the REM, the rapid eye movement stage, and you must get into deep sleep to get your brain properly refreshed. As you get older, the requirements are less, probably because your brain power, in some folk, is less. Heaven forbid. So we understand about sleep. It is important that we get it, and important that we pay attention and make sure that we get it. And if we don't get those REM sleeps, we will suffer. This is just for fun, because I thought it was a good word to remember. This is when you wake up startled, or you wake up and you can't move, and you feel paralyzed, and you're falling. And that's got the wonderful title of hypnic myoclonia. So I'd like you to remember that. I should test you on it at the end of the lecture. How many of you are too drowsy to drive at times safely? About 100,000 people a year in the States probably die as a result of falling asleep at the wheel. And Lord knows how many crashes in this country. It is very easy to do. These are the warning signs. Microsleeps during a lecture like this are a sign of boredom or sleepiness. It shortens your life if you don't get enough of it. And there's evidence now in humans that that's the case as well. And finally, the output of our computer, of our body, is dependent on age. We lose stamina as we get on, debility, we don't work as well, and it is modified by how we react with the people around us, the team. And if you think computers don't do team working, think again. This is the schematic representation of an Airbus. And you can see those computers are backed up. They all cross-check each other all the time. In fact, they go to the extent of having the computers made by different manufacturers with different components, so that there's no chance of a common failure occurring. And it works. And it's teamwork. This man here lectured to us 2 or 3 years ago, Martin Bromley. He's a hero. Here he's pictured with his wife, Elaine, who went in for a routine operation. And if you have not seen the Elaine video, go to the CHFG, Clinical Human Factors Group site, and look at it. It is very, very harrowing and instructive. She went in for a routine sinus operation. Anaesthetist got into a problem with can't ventilate and cannot intubate. Situational awareness was lost. She became hypoxic. The surgeon just stood there. The nurses went and got a tracheostomy set. Surgeon did nothing, and the patient died. That's poor team working. Instead of actually suing the pants off the organization, Martin Bromley said, I cannot understand why you guys do not do team working in human factors. You must learn it. And he has made it his mission. And he has caught the ear of the very highest echelons of the health service. Go to the Google CHFG, or Clinical Human Factors Group, and have a look. They've got some terrific resources there, and I do urge you to take the course if you can. Now, that's the personal aspect of human factors, but you need to embed those in a system which supports it. Resilient, thriving organizations create that sort of environment, and it knows when to reduce output to take account of chronic concerns of safety. That's the hallmark of a good, thriving, sustainable business. How does the NHS measure up to that? Is output controlled? No. The only way you can control output is by the elective surgery, but the vast increasing burden of the elderly unwell, we have no control over that, and our resources are being cut. So I put to you, the NHS is not particularly a safe organisation at the moment. Characteristics of companies that do not have safety and that type of model are predictably dodgy. And this is BP. BP has form, not just with the Deep Horizons oil spill. This is the Texas oil refinery blow up. There's spills in the North Sea. They have serious form, chasing output all the time. So a good organization will anticipate, it will continually chase improvement, and it will continually balance the needs of the marketplace against safety issues, because it recognizes how deleterious, how harmful is a disaster, a catastrophe. And these are the ways in which they do it. They flatten the structure. They give autonomy to the coalface, because people, by and large, want to do a good job. They don't actually take their hands off the ball completely, but they do actually give people the freedom to do a good job. It doesn't always feel like that. Mrs. Thatcher introduced these reforms in 1982, and since then we've had general management, and it seems sometimes that we're not just fighting disease, but we are fighting the organisation. And that's sad, but it is a perception, and I think it's a reality that managers have been pushing to get output, output, output. We are actually being obstructive, when actually what we're trying to do is to protect our patients, usually. We have other challenges. Working time directive, John McPhee's paper from years ago now highlighted the huge loss of hours as a result of the European Working Time Directive. And yet we've still got to train, but we have to train differently. Again, in aviation, you can train in a focused way and deliver it. We're at the stage where we haven't quite understood the balance between structured training and service delivery. Night shifts. We've talked about fatigue, and I won't labour this point, but you can see how expecting our young ones to do heavy night shift is not a good learning environment, and the health suffers. We have to live with it. Increasingly, the train coming down the track is that we are going to be hands-on more at night. How the health service copes with that, I do not know. We have targets imposed, which we don't like, but actually do have a place. You know, at least there's a standard against which to set, but some of those mitigate against patient safety and quality of care. We know that. This is my hospital, Derriford. I'm on the board now as a non-exec, so we get all the information about the performance of the hospital, and the biggest item, of course, is finance. The chief executive, I do not know how she sleeps at night. There's our budget, and there's next year's budget. We have to save that amount of money. I guess most of us are in that league as big DGHs or tertiary centres. It's a huge challenge, and we've got to keep the quality up. But there is hope. I think the management side, the senior managers, recognise they cannot do this on their own. They've got to the stage where they are at the limits of their understanding of the core business to actually work out the solutions. We started doing ward rounds, and I think this is now a common phenomenon. The chief executives with a non-exec go round and look at different parts of the hospital. It is very revealing. On this particular ward, we were standing there talking, and the nurses were complaining about the fact that they'd come on, they'd do their shifts, they'd got their rotas worked out, come on in the morning, and then half the nurses would be taken away to cover a crisis on ICU or one of the orthopedic wards or whatever. And as we were on this ward talking about this, the nurse behind at the station spoke up and said, "Last Thursday, I had the worst experience I've ever had. I came on duty, we had 33 sick patients, fractured necks of femur, etc., and all our nurses were taken away bar 2 trained staff. She said, I just couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't deliver the... And then she burst into tears. She actually cried. And it was, I think, a bit of a revelation. That's perhaps too strong a word, but it certainly brought the point home to the chief executive, who is a very good chief executive. These nurses are under huge, serious strain from what is being done to them, and they need our support. And one of the ways that they will react is to do what happened at mid-staffs. Become detached. I'm here, I'll do what I can, and I'm off. We mustn't let that happen. And when things do go wrong, it's very important that we try and understand it and put it right. The association produces its consensus documents, and in one of them, this was the statement made, and I think that is absolutely right, and it conforms with the very best of business practice models. That's how you get the best out of an organization and how you keep your staff happy, as happy as possible. Liam Donaldson has had a crack at that. Milburn was not in that particular frame of mind, I think, saying one thing but doing another. We lurch from inquiry to inquiry, and yet we don't seem able quite to get a stable system where we continue to learn. The railways went through this phase in their early development, lots of rail inquiries, lots of learning from them. This is Thirsk, and this is, again, a human factors problem, and wherever you look, you will find absolute parallels with our situation in the health service now and in the past. Aviation has got its act together. A crash causes an awful lot of paperwork. It is visible. Governments will not let you get away with crashes. You lose your license. It is bad for business. They have got their act together. They have multiple ways of learning from error and near misses. Draw your attention to this. That is the Air Accident Investigation Bulletin. This is a quasi-independent organization which is part of the Board of Trade, but actually, as I say, independent. It produces reports on every serious accident which are models of objectivity, clarity, and analysis. No blame, they just say, this is what has happened. And that's the starting point for any other actions which happen. And the industry has learned from these in this country, US, Australia, wherever, and that's why flying is as safe as it is today. But it also has this, CHIRP, Confidential Human Factors Incident Reporting System. And that seemed to us in the association to be an ideal and easy thing for us to do. And it fits into the general hierarchy of learning from error, albeit at quite a low level, but an important level. And it started as a charity by the profession in just the same way as has CORES. Keep the reports coming. Make it your duty, as it should be, to report what you see as potential near misses, actual near misses, disasters if you like, but report them either here or to your local system or both, or to the national reporting portals. But do report them. They are published, as you know, in the college journals and in various other places, and the system is developing. This would be a typical story, a story of a busy consultant called away who left his trainee to do a gallbladder. The gallbladder turned out to be more difficult, the bile duct was cut, and the usual explanations. We've all been there to a lesser or greater extent. And disaster. But the point remains that it is under our control as clinicians. Nobody can gainsay that. And being busy is no defense. And whatever the pressures brought by management or elsewhere, or self-imposed because you've got to be somewhere else, always come back to the point. This is my patient. How would I like to be done by? These are the reporting systems we have at the moment. But what we lack is a medical accident investigation branch. And that really is a serious difference. We have the NPSA within the GMC and all that sort of thing now, but they're not of the same standard of professionalism as the Air Accident Investigation Board. We know that the Francis report was critical of the system, and we shall hear more about that today. What I would say, and I'd like to leave you with these thoughts, is that the new Health and Social Care Act has actually given us an opportunity to get more involved and to shape the environment in which we deliver care. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, but somebody has to do the job, and we should do it. It needs clinical leaders as never before, and it wasn't a single rogue healthcare worker who screwed up for mid-staffs, and we know it's going on elsewhere to a lesser extent perhaps. It was a team effort, and the people who can shape those teams and control it are clinicians, I feel. Ward rounds. Do we do ward rounds as much as we can? Do we actually now uncover these hidden costs and get control of them? Yes, we can do that now because we know the core business. So my conclusions, Mr. Chairman, are that revalidation and relicensing is going to get tougher. Take data collection very, very seriously as a team and as individuality, and monitor and keep ownership of your figures, and do contribute to a specialty audit. And I'm sure all of you do here, but in a hospital there are specialties which do not, and that's no longer actually acceptable. Team working. How do you work as a team? You must work as a team. You don't have to be bosom buddies, but you do have to get on, and you do have to make the effort. You must meet. In the vascular unit, we met regularly every week at 8 o'clock. Juniors do a presentation. We go through the diaries with our secretaries, have a bun, have a cup of coffee, and then do a joint ward round. And I see Alistair Walker there in the front, and he will testify that that's actually a very successful formula. That's aside from the MDT. The MDT is not that kind of team working. Hunt as a pack, and you will get the goodies. Don't hunt as a pack, and you will not get the goodies. Shape your administration and keep tight hold of the secretarial and administrative system. Let someone else take it away from you, you are emasculated. You cannot deliver quality care. Learn from error, socialize, and do become more professional and disciplined in the way that you behave in the workplace. Do you look professional? Do you act professional? Are you a good role model? Are you somebody who inspires confidence to your patients? And finally, take leadership seriously, and if you do, you can shape your working environment, or others will do it for you. Take a human factors or leadership course. Do not become overcommitted, and look after yourself and your families. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis.